All right, team, welcome back. Today we will be discussing one of the more popular chapters, collegiate sports. College sports is such an important chapter and area of sport management because of the sheer mass that college athletics has in its present form. College athletics contains major segments of the sports industry. We've got several of them on the slide. Um, the amount of money that is commanded for the broadcast or dissemination of collegiate athletic events, whether it's the traditional revenue producing sports like football and basketball, or more of the niche sports or um, the more Olympic sports like wrestling or softball, baseball. Those are all now commanding additional money due to the increased competition among television and broadcast networks to air uh, content. You've heard of the Big Ten Network, the SEC Network, the ACC Digital Network, the Longhorn Network. All of these new different networks need content to broadcast, and that's why we're seeing an increased amount of money being paid by these networks to conferences and universities. On top of that, college athletics is becoming an increasingly more trendy way for corporations to market to their target markets. So corporate sponsorships is certainly something that is picking up steam, and corporations are only limited by the creativity that might exist between these corporations and athletic departments to work out a sponsorship agreement, which we had talked about earlier in the class. And also now, as um, college, higher education, and college athletics are somewhat being defunded by states and by the local legislatures, we're seeing increased importance and emphasis being placed on um, development and fundraising efforts by universities, usually by the athletic director for giving or development. Coaches' salaries, of course, are increasingly rising, and the amount of coaches and assistants are also rising within many sports within athletics. And this has led to increased personnel as well as specialization within these athletic departments, but then also salaries rising. And um, as the amount of television coverage and new media coverage is increasing with college athletics, we see college athletics being able to reach more people, not just across the nation, but across the world. And so these are some of the reasons why um, college athletics as a segment is becoming more and more important, and the amount of money being pumped into college athletics is also increasing. So, of course, it's important to know about the beginnings of college athletics. And really, the history of college athletics is owed to a crew race. And the first intercollegiate athletic event was a boating race, a crew race between Harvard and Yale on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. And it was a race between Harvard and Yale. And although neither of those schools resided in New Hampshire, the reason it was there was because a a a Boston and Concord, New Hampshire-based business railroad company wanted to have a reason for people from who were fans of Harvard and Yale to take the train up to New Hampshire to witness this race. So this company was external to sports, and the railroad company was doing this as a way to drum up support for its business. So the crew race between Harvard and Yale was really the catalyst to drive business. So it's interesting that today we usually hear rhetoric that says the NCAA is about amateurism, but the first collegiate race was actually born through the help of a commercial business. So that's kind of interesting. So after we have the first crew race involving Harvard and Yale, um, we see other firsts. We have the first baseball game to be played in college athletics. We have the first football game. And although these contests probably look not that much, not much we would recognize today, as the textbook says, the football game involved bouncing of the ball and kicking of the ball. And of course, that does not describe how we look at football today. But what's of notable interest is that these first football and baseball and other athletic contests were student run. There was no coaches, there was no athletic directors. Instead, the students were the ones that organized the practices and arranged the games. And it wasn't until the money started to roll in because it was becoming popular. The Ivy League schools were attracting many spectators, and revenues were coming in for people to come in and pay to watch the games. It was only then that faculty realized that the potential power and value that intercollegiate athletics could have, and that's when the interest arose to have athletics be under the auspices of a university or be under the care of faculty. But of course, as the games became popular and more money came in, and the production of intercollegiate athletics became more comprehensive and complex, students were actually beginning to wonder, well, how are we going to manage this? So as college sport became more popular and rivalries between schools became more common, this actually led to, as the book mentions, mayhem in college sports. So there was no governing body for for college athletics, which meant that there was no eligibility or playing rules. So you had people who were not members of the university participating in games. There was mass cheating at times. Players were being compensated for playing, and it was not standardized, and it was not a level playing field. And of course, serious injuries arose, particularly from football, and some people even died. So this led to the creation of the Intercollegiate Football Association, and this was created by students, and it was created by Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia. So this was the beginning of some sort of governance within college sport. In 1895, in response to the dangerous nature of football, faculty and administrators began to get involved with intercollegiate athletics. So we had the Intercollegiate Conference of Faculty Representatives created, which we now know as the Big Ten Conference today. And this was done to create eligibility rules. In 1905, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States was also created as a way for governance and standardization. But in 1912, this entity changed its name to something that was more easy to pronounce, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA. And then NCAA's role began to change, and it began to provide oversight and monitoring recruitment activities and establishing principles of amateurism. So it wasn't just eligibility anymore, but it was kind of comprehensive and became the formal governing body of intercollegiate athletics, hopefully to rein in all of these dangers of college athletics, the lack of standardization, but safety, recruitment, getting money out of intercollegiate athletics, since the NCAA looked at college athletics as something that students would do on their free time and would help advance what sort of their educational process and the educational experience of being at college. So it was supposed to be subordinate to the educational process. The NCAA and college athletics went through a transition process highlighted by both World War I and World War II. And of course, between World War I and World War II was the Great Depression. So again, these sort of social phenomenon involving war and involving economic strife also impacted the NCAA. And in 1929, the Carnegie reports painted a bleak picture of college athletics. It said that there was academic and recruiting abuses, and that payments to student athletes and commercialization of college athletics was running rampant. So, as trying to hopefully fixing that, the NCAA was pressured to have more of a overseeing role and to really rein in these ills. And we see a lot of programs actually going from the phys ed department to the to different sort of departments known as athletic departments. However, a constant theme that we see throughout the NCAA's history is that the perception that college athletics is out of hands, whether it was in the beginning phases of college athletics in the late 1800s or the early 1900s, or in sort of in 1989 with this Harris poll. The notion is that college athletics is out of hand and that we need to rein them in. So helping to hopefully to respond to that in the wake of Southern Methodist University being the first athletic program to have football canceled and having their football program disbanded due to widespread violations and cheating involving academic standards and in their financial practices. The Knight Commission was formed as a way to hopefully provide suggestions to reform college athletics. And the Knight Commission was made of members from faculty and presidents and outside members of the community to hopefully work towards reforming college athletics. So, of course, even today, as I'm recording this lecture, the NCAA is embroiled in a controversy as to whether or not student athletes should be paid and what's the proper role of athletics in in the college experience. So, and of course, cheating. So, a lot of these issues that were brought that led to the creation of the NCAA in the first place are what the NCAA is still fighting. So it's kind of interesting that that's the case. Now, initially, college athletics were just for men. It was a male. It was males governing male sports, and although female sports existed, that was not something that the NCAA governed. Instead, women in intercollegiate athletics, it was looked at more from a participation model as opposed to a competition model. So, women, the thought process was in the 1800s, should not perspire. Instead, they should be physically active, and that they should not try to engage in strenuous athletic competition for fear of hurting themselves. So this sort of opinion and belief was also accompanied by dress codes that limited the ability for females to be athletic. And in 1892, basketball was introduced to women at Smith College. And in a few years later, the first intercollegiate athletics basketball game or intercollegiate athletics game took place. It was between Stanford and Cal, and there was even modifications for basketball. Their rough play was taken out of basketball, so no snatching for the ball, and you could not dribble more than I believe a few bounces. So the predominant sort of theme here was not competition, but instead participation, and that persisted in Stanford versus Cal. in terms of women participating in intercollegiate athletics, this viewpoint of participation as opposed to competition really existed until the 1960s, and then sort of this alternative model was pushed forward into more competition when the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women was created in 1971, and the emphasis was in participation and not commercialization, which differed from what we were seeing with men. And the AIAW provided a similar role to the NCAA, so it oversaw championships and it also hosted the first women's Final Four. However, shortly after the AIAW was shown to actually generate revenue because it signed a contract with I believe it was with NBC, or it could have been ABC. I apologize for not knowing, but it signed a contract with a major television outfit to broadcast AIAW events. And once the NCAA realized that women's athletics could also generate revenue, it started trying to steal the membership of the AIAW by offering women's athletic departments, because there was a men's athletic department and a women's athletic department. They offered subsidies for the women's team and travel expenses, and the NCAA said that they would not charge the women's teams any sort of membership dues because their counterparts were in the NCAA, and also offered to provide more television coverage for women's events. So all of these work to sway the membership of the AIAW to the NCAA. And finally, as their numbers were dwindling, the AIAW ended up suing the NCAA for interfering with its television contract, but ultimately these actions by the NCAA led to the termination of the AIAW. However, it should be mentioned that the AIAW was successful, along with Title IX, which we'll talk about briefly at the end of this chapter, in popularizing college athletics and athletics in general for women. So there was a massive increase in the number of women who participated in intercollegiate athletics. So the NCAA is the current sort of overriding governing entity of college athletics. And although other entities exist, such as the NAAI, which is for smaller colleges, and the NJCAA, which is the NCAA pretty much for junior colleges, but the NCAA itself has over 1,200 members. And the NCAA's primary function is to provide sound administration of intercollegiate athletics. In the stated mission and purpose is to maintain intercollegiate athletics as an integral part of the educational program for student athletes. So again, athletics supporting the educational experience for student athletes. And the NCAA home office is located in Indianapolis, and it's divided into 3 divisions: Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. And between all the divisions, the NCAA has about close to 500,000 student athletes, and they oversee and administer close to 100 championships in 23 sports. So pretty robust. The philosophy of the NCAA, again, is to make intercollegiate athletics part of the student body and part of the educational process, and by doing so, retain a clear line of demarcation between intercollegiate athletics and professional sports. And oftentimes, the mantra of the NCAA is that they want to provide the opportunity for student athletes to engage in athletics as an avocation, that it is done as something that they do on their free time, and that their primary goal is being students. So the NCAA has multiple functions. They work with their member institutions, which are schools, to come up with legislation, uh, rules that govern how member schools and their student athletes conduct themselves in intercollegiate athletics competition, and governance. So what happens in terms of administration and sort of providing a framework for schools to function. It also lays out baseline academic rules for amateurism, and number one should be that students are not compensated like professional athletes, um, and then that there's enforcement elements of the governance regime for the NCAA, where if a student athlete or a university violates NCAA rules, then it's subject to an enforcement process. So the NCAA promulgates its legislation and rules, and those rules may differ depending on the division. So Division One has their own rule book here, and then Division Two has their own rule book, and Division Three has their own rule book, and so on and so forth. So we see sort of a infographic that lists the different sorts of committees and other elements of governance that help make the NCAA work. You can take a look at that in your free time. It's made up of presidents and chancellors, and the executive committee here is sort of the overriding entity that's providing oversight to many of the elements of NCAA governance. We've got the association-wide committee, we've got the different division board of directors, and underneath them you've got different legislative councils and management councils. The NCAA is as I said, is headquartered in Indianapolis, and there they provide their services to their member institutions. There's 6 primary units: administrative services, championships and alliances, communications, eligibility center, enforcement, membership, and student athletes affairs. So administrative services sort of runs the NCAA and the different elements that make up the NCAA. Championships and alliances, those help to administer the different championships and affiliate events for the NCAA. Communications helps with any sort of messaging or communications that goes out to the public or to the member institutions. Eligibility Center helps to determine whether or not people seeking to become student athletes or who are student athletes and have issues are eligible. And then enforcement is what happens if there's a potential for violation for NCAA rules, and there's an enforcement process that occurs. And then membership services, services for NCAA schools, and then services for NCAA student athletes. Mark Emmert is the current NCAA president. He came most recently, I believe, from the University of Washington, and he has been president since 2010, succeeding the successful president, Miles Brand, who passed away. His salary is probably at this point more than $1.7 million, and he's been somewhat of a controversial president due to the commercialization that has occurred during his tenure as NCAA president. The NCAA is divided into 3 divisions. Like I said, Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. And they differ by virtue of the criteria that each school must meet in order to become a member. So Division 1, 2, and 3 have different sort of overriding missions, in a sense, that they have their own rules in regards to scholarships, recruiting, playing, and practice seasons. And while Division 1 is more about national recruiting, sort of having rules and governance and aspirations from a national perspective, and in athletics being from the perspective of the the viewer and people going to games. Divisions 2 and 3 more have rules and such that are more focusing on the needs of the participant. So, in terms of differences, the differences between the divisions focus on the number of sports, potential restrictions on financial aid and support that's given, stadium size and attendance, and also scheduling obligations. So Division One is focusing on a national spotlight and the highest level of competition, and that there's the opportunity to provide scholarships, whereas partial scholarships and a less number of sports are the focus of Division Two, and it's more regional and local athletes. In Division Three, um, there's no athletic scholarships traditionally, and it's more about providing opportunities to participate in athletics for the student body. So the Division One is the criteria is that athletic departments or universities must offer at least 14 sports combined, usually 7 men, 7 female, or 6 male and 8 female at a minimum. Um, the Again, the focus is more on competition and generating revenue for athletics. And to that end, um, the for football, well, Division One is separated into football bowl subdivision, which is sort of Division A traditionally, and the lower tiered is football championship subdivision, which is FCS. So of course now both divisions have championships, but um, the playoff and championship is more limited in FBS, and other schools go to bowl games. Um, FBS schools must schedule at least 60% of their games against FBS schools with a minimum of 4 home contests. FCS is at least 50% of games must be scheduled and played against FBS schools. Um, in terms of attendance, for FBS, they must average at least 15,000 people in actual or paid attendance per home game. And for FCS, there's no actual attendance requirement. For Division Two, again, it's more focusing on regional sports, and the minimum is 10 sports, 5 men, 5 women, with 2 team sports for each gender. And athletic scholarships are provided, but it could be partial scholarships. Um, and they have different scheduling obligations. So 50% of the Division Two games for that school must be against other Division Two or FBS or FCS opponents. And then there's no scheduling requirements for other sports. There's no attendance requirement for football or arena game requirements for basketball. And then finally, as I said, Division Three, it's there's no athletic scholarships provided. Instead, it's more looking at some merit or financial aid, but not scholarships. The focus is on participation. There needs to be at least 10 sports, 5 male and 5 female, and there's minimum sort of restrictions on Division Three. Um, in terms of governance from a conference standpoint, um, conferences, uh, by rule, there must be a minimum of 7 institutions within a single division. And Division One, that school must sponsor at least 12 Division One sports, including men's basketball and women's basketball. Conferences are fill the function of offering assistance to schools and programs, and have legislative power to enact specific legislation for everyone in each school in that conference. They also work in sponsoring and administering championships, mostly for football and for basketball, and but they also, of course, administer other sports. They have they provide benefits, including revenue sharing. So conferences like the Big Ten and Pac-10 and SEC distribute millions of dollars to their member institutions on an annual basis. And we've seen a lot of we've seen schools wanting to be in conferences for exposure to television, higher visibility and revenue through television deals and corporate sponsorships, and also, as I said, revenue sharing. So for example, the ACC provided $20.8 million to each of their 15 schools in 2015, and the Big 12 provided $23 million. So this is why we saw a lot of conferences, a lot of conference realignment over the last few years. It's been quite interesting. In fact, we've got this New York Times article, and I'll put the link online so you can see, but it actually shows, it provides a graphic of the uh, the conference jumping process over the last few years, and it helps, very illuminative. So as I said, schools might want to switch conferences because of sort of the financial opportunities that are part of those different conferences. We've also seen, as a part of conference switching in the rise of commercialization in athletics, the creation of a playoff system. And so 4 teams are in the playoff. It began in 2014. It's going to run for the next 10 year or 10 next 9 years, and the teams are chosen by a playoff committee. So very interesting. University athletic departments are able to generate revenues through tickets, through leasing out facilities, as well as through other means and new media. But also the cash flow goes through your revenues to having to pay for new facilities and renovate new facilities, also escalating coaching facilities and the escalating cost of recruiting. So all of these different output expenses go back into generating additional revenues for your university, the University Athletic Department. We're also seeing increasing issues involving players in college athletics. In theory, the university and the athletic department are the ones that are supposed to protect the players, but for as long as anyone can remember, there's been a refrain that student athletes are being exploited by the system. And as revenues in college athletics continue to rise, everyone is benefiting except for the student athletes. And although there has been some changes, some schools offering discretionary stipends to give to student athletes, relaxed rules for ability to serve training table, etc. But student athletes seem to want a piece of the pie, one of the piece of the revenues. And so there's been move towards unionization, headed off by the College Athlete Players Association, and most notably Northwestern has been sort of the test subject for that. So if student athletes are found to be employees, then they have the right to collectively form a union to collectively bargain and pull their leverage. So this is something that we very well might be talking about in class, and something to keep an eye on, and what sort of changes that would have to college sports. There are substantial career opportunities within college athletics, whether it's being a coach or an athletic director for university, or an assistant or an associate. But there's also lower level opportunities in athletic department, whether it's working in development, working in compliance, working in ticketing, working in student services. And also there's opportunities from a conference level as conferences become they hire more employees to accommodate the increasingly diverse needs of their member institutions and student athletes, or at the NCAA. And so we will talk more in class about these different career opportunities and sort of the unique skills that they require and the issues on day-to-day that encompass them. And then finally, there is no short of issues within college athletics. Like I had mentioned before, historically speaking, female athletes were put in a position where they were not able to participate in college athletics, and there was not as many participation opportunities. The textbook highlights a void between male student athletes and female student athletes from participation and revenue generation, and then also resources from the institution going to male athletes at a higher amount than female athletes. But Title IX, with its introduction in the mid 20th century, has led to increased opportunities for female student athletes by virtue of the fact that Title IX applies to any sort of higher education institution receiving federal funds. And so that has required universities to provide approximately equal opportunity to participate in college athletics as men, and then also making sure that similar resources are available to women who participate. We've also, and that has led sometimes in not the intended consequences with university athletic departments terminating male sports because they want to get into proportionality with the requirements of Title IX by removing opportunities for male athletes rather than creating new opportunities for female athletes. Hiring practices are also being called into question for college for athletic departments across the nation in terms of having equal representation in terms of opportunities for women and people of color or minoritized populations. And so this is an issue that has repeatedly come up about more opportunities at the coaching and administrative level for minoritized populations. Also, athletic reform, making sure that student athletes are provided with a meaningful opportunity to obtain education, and that things like clustering and making sure that there's integrity in the academic process is something that is preserved. Agents, gambling, and amateurism, making sure that NCAA rules are complied with and that student athletes do not succumb to the temptation of being paid in violation of NCAA rules. New technology like social media or online media to broadcast games through the internet, or allowing universities to create their own online digital broadcast network. These are things that are changing the landscape of college athletics and providing new opportunities for revenue. Player activism and potential for racist incidents to occur on campus. We've seen an increase in player activism. We don't have to look much further than what happened on the campus of the University of Missouri, where to combat what alleged events of racism against minoritized populations and people of color, the University of Missouri student athletes led by the football team staged a walkout, and that led to the demands of those protests and those individuals protesting to be met. So this is an issue that is not going away. And then pay for play, again, student athletes wanting a larger piece of the pie, recognizing that student athletes do have a large amount of power and that they can exercise that power. So these are a few issues that we'll talk about in class, and hopefully this was a helpful introduction to the NCAA, as well as intercollegiate athletics and the issues that are unique to this unit of sport management. Thank you.